Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to all of you. I see that the audience is joining, so I'll wait just a few seconds before we kick it off. You have a chance to see our panel of speakers already on camera. All right, I see many participants. The count is climbing up really quickly, so a few more seconds and then we start. All right, a warm welcome to all of you, and thanks a lot for making the time to be with us today. My name is Lorenzo Ferri, and I'm a product director at Elsevier, working in RDM for a few years. And together with Bill Ayers and Wiebe van der Meer and Haystack, we will be your present the content today. Today is webinar number 2 in the RDM webinar series we're organizing. And last week we had webinar number 1, and we spoke about data submission and what institutions can do to support researchers to submit their data. Today we talk about a related topic, different but related, and that's about the tracking of research data that your researchers at your institution are producing. Now, I will hand over the baton and the stage to our speakers in a moment. But before doing that, I would like to take a moment to reflect on the context as I observe it, to provide a bit of context for the presentations that will follow. Again, let me take a quick moment to share the name of the speakers. Bill Ayers from the University of Manchester, Wiebe van der Meer, and Haystack from the University of Groningen. As I mentioned already last week, in my experience, we are passing the tipping point in RDM, the tipping point that demarcates the difference between seeing RDM as something for the future, something that we don't have to act upon today, to understanding that RDM has become a high priority and the time to act is now. And there are many forces that are contributing to this development. But here I want to mention the 3 most important forces that I observe. On one hand, I see the funders with their policy and data sharing are playing a big role, and more funders around the world are actually introducing strict policies. The publishers with their mandates for authors to link data to articles. And then governments who understand the importance of open data and data sharing and are codifying in national strategic agendas the importance of open data. In response to all these forces, I also observe a lot of activities among institutions. Institutions are actually ramping up their RDM efforts. And talking to many institutions, here is a list of the most common initiatives that I observe around the world. On one hand, institutions are hiring data specialists, be they steward or the librarians. They're providing services to their researchers to support the creation of good data management plans. They're providing the tools and the resources for researchers to submit their data, for example, providing a data repository. They're reporting on data sharing and they're tracking data sharing at their institution, for example, to check compliance against institutional policy, or generally to assess what is the progress at the institution on data sharing. And last but not least, many institutions want to showcase their open data on their public portal. But whenever I talk about an institution, about RDM, there is a challenge that's all of the times emerges. And the challenge is, where is the institution's research data? What seems to be an actually trivial question is quite a challenging question and will be the main topic of the dialogue and the presentations today. Let me reflect for a moment why it is so hard for an institution to track research data. And I will reference a piece of research that we've done a couple of years ago, looking at where the institution research data is being deposited. So where your researchers at your institutions are depositing their data. What we found out is that up to 90% of the institution's research data gets deposited outside of the institutional data repository. So for example, it gets deposited in domain-specific repositories or generalist, public generalist repositories. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these public repositories. So it becomes really, really hard for an institution, for the library, for the administrators to track and find all this research data. And if you wonder why this is such a big number, well, actually, the answer is pretty simple. The best practices among researchers and among the community of researchers is to deposit research data in the domain-specific repository where the community revolves around, gravitates around. So for example, if you're a geneticist, GenBank will be probably the domain repository where you want to publish your data. But all of this poses a big challenge for institutions and for the libraries and for the administrators to track the research data. Hence the challenge, where is my institution research data? So this is my intro, and obviously I'm really keen to hear about the experience from our speakers today. So let me hand over to Bill Ayres from the Manchester University to hear how they're tackling the challenge.
Great, I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Many thanks, Lorenzo, for a perfect introduction. And I'd just like to say thank you very much to Alexandra and the team at Elsevier for inviting me to talk here today. Let me just check I can move the slides on. Yes, so yeah, just a little bit of introduction for me personally. So yeah, as Lorenzo said, my name is Bill Ayres. I'm the strategic lead for research data management here at the University of Manchester Library, and welcome from the UK. So I have nearly 20 years of experience of working in universities and higher education in the UK. I had a long period of that time working in IT infrastructure management. And then in 2016, I moved over to the library side of things. I very much like working in the library. Yeah, that was with a focus on research data management from that point onwards. For the University of Manchester Library, our research services team at Manchester provides services that span the whole of the life cycle. So we deal with planning and with good research data management practice. We cover training and advocacy. We curate and review data, and we have a big focus on open access publishing for both outputs from projects and for their data. I mean, summing us up, I would say that we really are focused on open, reproducible, and responsible research. And a big part of this was kind of cemented last year when we launched our Office for Open Research. I'm going to include a load of links at the end so people can get to some of these things that I'm talking about as I go through. But yeah, so to think about the challenge for today and about the issues around our university's research data that's out there. So yeah, the background to this is really that the University of Manchester has an ongoing research lifecycle programme, which is a university level programme that has been going since 2018. And the focus for the RLP, as I will talk to from now on, is to remove barriers to research and provide enhanced services, support, training and infrastructure for our researchers. This is in a context that considers factors such as fair data, reproducibility, archiving and other open research aspects. And we also, you know, as Lorenzo said, we're also thinking about increasingly expectations from research funders and from the assessors that come and examine the research that takes place at the UK institutions. And within this context, the RLP identified that the university had a real need for its own institutional research data repository. Some primary factors in this decision were that while many researchers do publish data in the external repositories that have been talked about, we did need to provide a repository for disciplines that don't have their own research data repositories externally. And we also wanted to help make the data from those disciplines more accessible and reusable. We want to also enable institutional administration and support for data publishing to be more effectively delivered, and also provide an ability for us to report on data outputs for a wide range of internal and external audiences. This is where we're talking to, you know, to senior leaders at the university, to the researchers themselves, to our funders and those assessment agencies. We're also very keen to create a closer connection between the data resource outputs that the university produces and the university itself. This is sometimes a disconnect that we see. So moving on, the project to implement our research data repository was undertaken during the years of 2019 to 2021, and that technical implementation work was followed with a formal launch of our Figshare for Institutions repository in May 2021. Now, this is owned and managed by the University of Manchester Library in the team that I'm part of. And the research data management team, which is based in the library's research services team, are responsible for managing Figshare as a service. And that includes so training, advocacy and engagement. A key part of our ongoing training offer is to get people working with the repository. We also review and curate data deposits at the moment in a fairly light touch way, but we hope to expand that part of the service. We're responsible for reporting and administration, which will be a focus of what I'm going to talk about in a moment. We also obviously cover service development, and alongside that, the research data management librarians have all the other things that they do, which busy librarians do in university libraries. Thinking about the project as it went through, we just to kind of put the context for this in place. The University of Manchester's CRIS platform is Pure, as many people on the call today will know. It's important to be clear that Pure is very much the point of truth for our institutional research outputs and is often regarded as the shop front for research at Manchester. The requirements and practice of research data publishing has moved on considerably, however, since we launched our Pure instance. And prior to adopting Figshare for datasets to be presented in Pure, we require Manchester researchers to manually submit the DOI for a dataset so that the team could import this into Pure's metadata in the datasets tab. This was and is the kind of interaction that I think we can, is a bit of a burden for researchers' time when they have little enough of that in the first place. And it also relies on researchers having to find out about the manual process and engage with it. So that's exactly the kind of barrier that the RLP was working to remove across the board. So during the implementation project for Figshare, there was a lot of discussion about how the data resources published in our Figshare could be included in and presented by Pure. This wasn't regarded as an essential aspect to have at the launch of Figshare. But once our Figshare was being used by researchers, this aspect was the priority for ongoing development for our data publishing service. Now, as things stood at the time, and I think this is still the case now, there was no off-the-shelf integration that existed between Pure and with Figshare. So we had to think about our options for making this work. So we had a couple of options. The first of these, that we could work with Figshare and pay them to develop and build this, or we could attempt to do this either in-house via our own development team in the library, or to outsource it to technical developers and support outside. In both those cases, this would mean committing to an ongoing support and maintenance cycle for something which would be a home-brewed and kind of home-developed piece of work, and that was something that we weren't keen to do. So happily, by a quirk of and a timing for this and the connections we have, and thanks particularly to our active and productive relationship with Elsevier as an aspect of our investment in Pure, we did become aware of Elsevier's data monitor product as part of a wider product update event that was taking place. So thinking about this, the question that we asked ourselves was, having heard this, we talked about it in the library and with colleagues, and it was a question of, could data monitor perhaps be the answer to the question that we had? So the event gave us a great introduction to Data Monitor's headline features, and crucially, it was an introduction to its native ability to provide candidate dataset records for Pure. Once we understood what Data Monitor could be used for, the possibility of using this to provide that essential link between Figshare and Pure that we're after started to take on some clarity. We opened the conversation with colleagues at Elsevier, and we assembled a working group at the university, and that includes our research data management team, our metadata team in the library, and the Pure team who handle all of the Pure interactions. And this working group was set up with an understanding that what we were trying to do would intersect with each of our functional areas. So it was essential at that point to have the right people around the table. And I think that's always key to delivering an effective outcome in a project, is getting the right people in place in the first place. So thinking about how we made this work. So Elsevier provided some excellent familiarization and training for our small core group of data monitor users in that working group. And we had a period of implementation which was undertaken. Key elements of this included, so first of all, connecting our University of Manchester Figshare to data monitor in our local dashboard and ensuring that data sets deposited in Figshare were visible there. We also had a collective intake of breath when we saw that there were nearly 15,000 data resources from Manchester researchers that had been already published and deposited into the external repositories that Data Monitor can draw from. A bit more on this later. We also developed a robust workflow to validate data resources in Data Monitor ahead of their import into Pure. And this also led to us identifying and addressing a handful of bugs and queries around the functionality which we saw. These were addressed thanks to the technical support that was given to us from the Elsevier team. So with that technical implementation, testing and operational processes in place, we moved on to enabling the link between Figshare and Pure that Data Monitor was now relied on to facilitate. At this point, the University of Manchester Figshare instance had about 600 deposits that had been made. The metadata and validation team moved on at this point to working their way through all of these. And this was a job that was made easier due to the team recently acquiring an additional one full-time equivalent person into the team, so a full-time member of staff. This need for ongoing resource for additional functional tasks is something that I'm sure people on the call will be familiar with in their own settings and contexts too. And it is something that we always have to consider. The work to ingest the data sets from Figshare into Pure was assessed and reviewed as they went, and we also compared the information displayed in Pure datasets with Figshare once they were in there. So something I would mention is that in this process across that many data resources, there were some discrepancies and quirks, and we identified those and ironed them out during the testing. And for most datasets, I would say we're now operating in a way that we're able to treat this as a standard task. So this has become something that is business as usual for the team that are responsible for that.
Bill?
Yes, hi.
Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah.
I'm reading a message from the audience. Could you speak a bit more slowly?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course I will. Yes, yeah. Apologies.
Perfect. No, of course. Thank you.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So, so I would say for most data sets, we are now operating in a way that is able to treat this as a standard task. It is part of our regular business at the university and the teams. And for information, I'd say it's worth mentioning that we are seeing some slightly unpredictable behavior when certain records in Figshare have changes made to them. This is primarily in areas where perhaps a version has been applied or there is a change to an individual data deposit, and also where the Figshare collections are updated. We're investigating this internally. We have a JIRA ticket open with Elsevier to address this. I'd say the crucial aspect in all of these matters is to have a route to raise issues and faults and to track them through a resolution that we can work with. So that is something where, again, our relationship with Elsevier is key to ironing out technical issues and difficulties. So thinking about those other data resources that are out there. So yes, as I mentioned before, when we plugged in and turned on Data Monitor at Manchester, we discovered approximately 15,000 data sets that were in there in external repositories. So, I mean, to return to the title of this this webinar series, there were not only lots of needles, but also lots of haystacks out there. So the first step to addressing a challenge is, as we know, is to know the scale of it. And in this instance, Data Monitor has been instrumental in providing clarity on where our data resources are and in what numbers. Reflecting on where we're up to now, I'd say our current use case for Data Monitor is perfect for deposits in our own Figshare, but for researchers who use external repositories, and this is the thing that Lorenzo was talking about very early on, where there is still likely to be a manual step that they have to undertake with us to get them into Pure, and to have them presented in Research Explorer. So this is a development item for the working group, and we have a few aspects of this under discussion. Things we're thinking about there include that we should perhaps aim to import data resources from the big external repositories first, places like Zenodo. An alternative, however, would be that we may be better to focus our efforts to serve disciplines and research groups whose data resources are less well represented in Pure in general. And if we're going to do this, we will need more people to work in the team. We need more people to work in the team, either permanently or temporarily, to help us to deal with this. This returns to the issue of if we build and enlarge a service itself, then sorry, we're skipping through there, aren't we? If we build and enlarge a service itself, then obviously we have a challenge there for the resources that we have in the team to deal with that. So yeah, this is very much a work in progress, and I hope that it's something that once we've been through the process of bringing much more of these data sets into our own control and be able to report and work with them more directly, it's something that I can update this community about in due course and perhaps at a later event. The other thing I wanted to talk about today in relation to all of this was a bit of context around the wider open research picture and perhaps some unexpected benefits that we have seen for the for Data Monitor. So yeah, as part of the library's Office for Open Research, our research services team are also driving forward a series of projects that focus on priorities identified in our open research strategy. One of these is the development of an open research tracker, a tool being developed in-house at Manchester to help researchers and admin staff get a better handle on open research publications, outputs, metrics, and other reporting areas. That tracker is currently focused on open access publications, and we work with our Pure team to build this functionality. Development areas also include the ability to report on open resources and things published in platforms like Figshare and protocols.io and so on. So I'd say it's clear that Data Monitor, we can use that to support a wider representation of our data resources, and that'll have an excellent feed for the tracker. An unexpected benefit that I just wanted to mention as well is that we're also have a nascent project to deliver an open code and software policy for the university and to provide, excuse me, to provide better reporting and metrics related to this area. Now, we don't know when we didn't know this when we implemented Data Monitor, but additional testing has shown that it has an ability to identify and present items recorded as software, and this will be really useful in supporting the tracker and be another source of information that we can help our tracker to report on these open research outputs in a holistic manner. Alongside this, the library has a current project to investigate and facilitate the practice of data stewardship at the university. I think I mentioned that on the previous slide. Yeah. Yeah, there we go, data stewards. And yeah, so we've got a project for data steward. We've got a workshop with interested parties, which is taking place next month. And we aim to develop a network of data stewards at the university during the rest of the year. It is likely that the Open Research Tracker will have a persona in the dashboard to reflect the requirements of data stewards. And underpinning that is the use of Data Monitor to give them exactly the information they need at their fingertips. So just to round up from my side of things, and to lead on to colleagues from Groningen. So yeah, where are we now and where are we going? So I would say that Data Monitor has been instrumental in addressing a technical issue that we would otherwise have had to spend a lot of ongoing time in terms of development and support. It does now occupy an essential role in our developing open research platform infrastructure. Crucially, it's also removed a manual process for our researchers who deposit data into Pure, and we've automated that process using Data Monitor and the work by the working team to make that integration with Pure. As we become more familiar with Data Monitor, we've also realized that it has the potential to underpin several other important areas of service development, especially in relation to reporting and open software and open code. We're thinking carefully about the longer term resourcing implications that having a real handle on data resources in terms of capturing and reporting about them may have. This is additional work, and we want to plan for it to be sustainably resourced within our service teams. But there's a recognition there that the challenges faced by everyone who works in these areas within HE, it's not easy to get extra people, and we have to think about that. I would just like to close by saying, we're always keen and happy to be part of the wider community and user group for Elsevier's products. And we're similarly very happy to connect with and speak openly to any institutions who may be considering how a product like Data Monitor could work for them. So please do get in touch. Thanks very much for listening today. Apologies for going too quickly to start with, and I'm very happy to lead on to colleagues in the next presentation.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for your contribution. I must say, I actually learned some new things that I hadn't had a chance to learn from the last time we spoke. I had not appreciated the journey that your institution had gone through over the years. This makes me realize that this should be seen as a journey, right? This should be seen a continuous investment in a certain direction, and over time you expand. But also keeping in mind that every expansion costs resources. So it's also a balancing act between what you can afford to do and what you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely, Lorenzo.
Thank you so much for that. And I know you will be with us also in the Q&A. Over to Wiebe and Hester now from the University of Groningen. Wiebe, Hester, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lorenzo. Thanks to Elsevier for inviting us to talk about our experiences with looking for data sets in a huge haystack of data. To briefly introduce ourselves, Wiebe van der Meer and I, Hester Kamstra, both work as CRIS metadata specialists at the University of Groningen. We have a background as an information specialist and me as an archaeologist, so both of us are used to working with data, and we have been involved in implementing data sets into and showing them through our CRIS for a number of years now. Bill has talked extensively about the University of Manchester's journey with introducing data sets as a source of research output to broadcast to the world. And we will share our experiences from Groningen. To start off, why are we as a university interested in showing not only research output, classical research output such as publications, but also data sets now? Well, first of all, it is required by the largest funding agency within the Netherlands, the WO, the Dutch Research Council. This organization provides most of the national funding to universities in the Netherlands, and it says in its policy that it expects researchers to, when they receive funding, deposit research data in a trusted repository in such a way that the data are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, the FAIR principles. So that makes it essential from a researcher's point of view to ensure that they have a place to put their data after they finish a NWO-funded project. That's not the only reason that we are interested in broadcasting our researchers' data sets. NWO emphasizes FAIR. Our own university has gone through a development embracing open science as well, implementing FAIR principles. And one of the steps in the FAIR cycle, as you can see here, is the step after research. Data should be discoverable, reusable, citable, and that's where we come into place, working with a CRIS, which enables us to show everything that our researchers produce to a wider audience. So apart from showing publications, showing journal articles, book reviews, etc., data sets are another very important product of our researchers, which deserve as much, if not more, visibility. So these are the two main points why the University of Groningen became concerned with showing data sets. However, as Lorenzo has showed earlier, only a very small percentage, less than 10% of data sets are stored in an institutional repository. Groningen has an RDMS repository ourselves as well. However, as I will show you later, this is, as is the case, often not the main repository in which our researchers deposit their data. So that poses a problem. But we were aware that our researchers were producing data and we wanted to make it accessible, findable, etc. We were aware of the haystack and we wanted to pluck the needles out and enter the first data sets into our CRIS, into Pure. one of our colleagues, Christina Elsevier, initially started to enter datasets manually into Pure. We were aware of a few known databases that researchers used, for instance, Figshare, Zenodo, repositories that many of you might be familiar with already. And she created a manual query through which she was able to find a number of datasets that were deposited there previously. However, there was no option yet to directly import these deposits into our CRIS, so she was manually adding them to Pure. The end result is quite nice, as you can see in the graph on the right. To be able to show the datasets on your portal, to broadcast them is a nice thing, but when you move down the line, where you have to manually add the metadata of a dataset with 50 plus authors, or 1600 in the case sometimes of astronomical datasets, it becomes much less easy, very time consuming, and not fun to do at all. So Christina was able to find some datasets in the large Haystack, but we were aware already of the fact that we were not finding close to all of them. We were missing a lot. Now, continuing down this path was not an option. As I said, it took lots of work, lots of time for an essentially incomplete picture. So continuing this way would not improve the completeness and the scope of datasets we would be able to show on our research portal. One of the options we considered was making an API connection with our CRIS with Dataverse. Dataverse NL, the Dutch version of Dataverse, is the main repository we tried to sell to our researchers. We advise researchers to deposit their data in Dataverse for a number of reasons, mainly for good metadata quality, and we know that it's a trustable repository. However, as Bill already mentioned, there are subfield specific repositories that are important for researchers to add their data to, because that's where their colleagues hang out and share their data. So just making an API for Dataverse and to connect to our CRIS was not a feasible option. Luckily, Data Monitor came around, a product by Elsevier, which our university was alerted to in 2019. That's when we participated in a pilot study. I think this presentation will be uploaded on the internet as well, so you can click through and read the report on this first case study regarding our university. But essentially, it was a success. We were able to systematically start collecting the data sets from the large amount of repositories that we were both aware and unaware of. To show you some figures, whereas through manually adding data sets to our repository, we were able in 2021 to collect around about 600 data sets. 2 years later, this has increased to almost 4,000, mainly through the use of Data Monitor. And as you can see as well, the amount spent by our metadata team on validating the metadata of these data sets has decreased significantly. So not only are we able to increase the volume, increase the scope of data sets we import, we also have to have much more time on our hands to do other important stuff regarding data sets in education. Not only have we imported almost 3,500 more data sets since starting the use of Data Monitor, we also have a much better idea of the locations, the repositories that our researchers are using for depositing their data sets. On both a national level, you can see Dataverse as the main source there, but also DANS, which is another product which is used mainly by archaeologists. And internationally, you already know about Figshare, probably Zenodo, but a number of very specific databases such as Pangea, CCDC for chemistry, etc. To summarize, we now have a much better idea of the locations that we need to look for datasets. Now, of course, not all is well. Data Monitor improves our abilities, but unfortunately, there's still no guarantee for completeness. There's a good chance that we have the bulk of repositories available in our scope of view right now. However, there's always a chance that researchers are storing the data elsewhere. Moreover, balancing FAIR principles and issues concerning privacy law, concerns from researchers about who owns their data is a precarious balancing act, which will continue, I think, as long as we develop practice surrounding open science. And finally, another issue is that the findability of data sets, both by us as well as Data Monitor, is heavily dependent on the quality of input of metadata. Now, not all is lost. There are some fairly concrete solutions to these issues. While we cannot be sure we have every Data Monitor helps us find every data set, we can improve the use of Data Monitor through suggesting new repositories to them, which will then be entered into the software. When it concerns of privacy, openness, that balance, education to both researchers as well as our data stewards, which belong to our Digital Competence Center, is one important solution, as well as national collaboration. So frequent discussions with colleagues from other Dutch universities about problems we encounter, solutions to these problems. And finally, in the case of quality of input, equates to easiness of findability. Again, education and support by both us as well as our data stewards is a very important solution. Now, to briefly look forward, one of the original goals of implementing Data Monitor was to make reporting a new ability. We are currently still not using reporting as a monitoring tool for datasets specifically, but as soon as we have the idea that datasets from all of our faculties are more or less representative of the total amounts of datasets that are produced, we will start monitoring and reporting on them. Moreover, we want in the near future to start importing from our own repository. However, this is also used for storing data that is not yet finalized, that's not yet suitable for publication. So we need to figure out a way to link our RDMS with our quiz without opening everything up. the role of our data stewards is currently limited to their own faculty, and they have just started basically. So in terms of education and support, we will continue to work on that with them. And finally, continued cooperation with other Dutch universities will stay very important, even more so looking at developments in funding decisions, for instance, within the Netherlands. Now, to conclude, there are a number of points we wish we'd known before starting to add data sets into our quiz, before start showcasing data sets to the world. It is a good idea to have some kind of strategy before starting to implement this. I think the way in which the University of Manchester is starting to develop a strategy is a very good way to start adding data sets as another product of research. The way we did it, thinking that it is important, so manually starting to collect and add data sets into our quiz, it's not ideal. We are at a fairly good and confident point right now, but this is something we wish we'd known beforehand. Moreover, some fields of research have their own very specific relevant repositories. So in our communication to researchers, we can of course stimulate them to use a certain repository, but you cannot force them. It might even be detrimental to their connection with other colleagues in their field if you force them to use a specific repository. So communication again is very important there. And finally, to conclude, the completeness and data quality varies a lot among repositories. That's when advising researchers to use certain good repositories might be beneficial. But as I said earlier, the quality of the input by our researchers and data stewards also is of importance there. So if they input high quality data into a maybe a more messy repository, it means that we can still find their data sets. Thank you, Alexandra and Lorenzo.
Thank you so much for your contribution. I think the common theme I see across Bill's presentation and your presentation is that this is quite a journey, and this must be a deliberate decision to actually embark into this journey because it costs efforts. So think really well what you want to achieve before you start investing resources in this direction. You know, we are now through the presentation we had prepared. We also got some questions from the audience. I suggest we all come online now and join the panel discussion. And actually, I would like to start from your slides that was just presented a moment ago. What would you like to, what would you do differently with the knowledge you have today if you went 2 years back in the projects? Where would you start? And when you give the answer, please have in mind all those institutions that are online today, they're perhaps starting today. So what would you recommend to them that you would have liked to know 2 years ago or 3 years ago? Bill, would you like to start with that answer?
Yeah, sure. Let me jump in. Thanks, Lorenzo. Yeah, so this is around, I guess, what would we have liked to have known at the beginning of the journey rather than now. Yeah, I mean, this is to return maybe to some of the points that have been talked about in the pre-meeting that we did as presenters. When we first started out implementing our research data repository, and then obviously we're looking at the options for integration with Pure and so on. I don't think we were aware at that point that there were obviously institutions who were already working in these areas and had, you know, the ability to kind of help us with this. So it is always, you know, one of the great things I think about. And you know, just to talk about ancient history, the difference between working in an IT focused area and working in the library is that the library has these amazing collegiate and network connections across so many areas, and you know, that is something that, you know, we really try and lean into now and make the most of with our connections across the you know, particularly the European institutions we work with. So yeah, I would have probably asked more questions and gone to more of these kind of webinars to get a feel for that. But luckily, as I said in my presentation, we did attend an Elsevier product update which talked about Data Monitor, and that really sowed the seed for us. And I think, you know, the great thing there was that gave us the connection to be able to work with you guys to get a really good feel for how Data Monitor could help us. And that you know, these things kind of led on fairly logically from that point. It was something that gave us an ability to work there. So, you know, yeah, I mean, I don't like to think about, you know, there's no point thinking about yesterday too much, but yeah, I think, you know, we've made good progress. We could have been a little bit quicker, but universities always move slowly as well. So yeah, I think we're very happy to carry on developing the, you know, how we deliver this service as well. And, you know, we're going to be working with you guys to do that.
Great, thank you, Bill. Wiebe, Hester, anything you want to add to that?
I think looking forward, it would be nice to, of course, we want to take some kind of a burden away from researchers, as Bill has emphasized as well. But I also think it's important to make clear to them that data sets as a type of product are very important too for them. While some researchers may be a bit hesitant in sharing our data completely openly, it really matters to showcase your raw data as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And perhaps if I may follow up on that, can I ask you to share your experience in involving researchers in proactively declaring the data sets that have deposited, proactively, you know, uploading the metadata in your CRIS system? Did you try to do that at your institution? Is it something that works? Would you recommend doing that?
Shall I go first, or do you want to?
Yeah,
go
Bill,
first?
please go ahead.
Yeah, so I made reference to this in the early part of my presentation. We have a gateway web page for Pure where people can deposit. Well, they can go there with the DOI and they can put it in, and then it will go to our Pure team to do the work behind the scenes to validate that and to link it. I'm going to say that I would always rather, if we can do this piece of work for researchers in an automated way, in a joined up way, I'd rather do that, because in these things, it's always one other thing for a researcher to do. And we know in our field that researchers have no time for additional stuff, particularly, I think, around what they can sometimes regard as the kind of the very end of the list of jobs that they have, which is around compliance and around, you know, I'm not going to say open research isn't a focus for them, but I think, you know, the steps to do that can be quite difficult sometimes. And if we can make the ability to publish things openly easier, which is what we're all talking about today, then that is actually the way to go. So yeah, we can do that, but I'd rather take it away from them as a hassle.
Thank you. Hester, Wiebe, what's your experience at Groningen?
Yeah, I think we can agree on that what Bill mentioned. We do see some researchers who are adding manually data sets to Pure, but that's a really small amount. And in that case, we support it, of course, but yeah, they are busy enough with their research. So that, yeah, we don't want to burden them, as Bill mentioned.
No, I think involving them in steps prior to depositing their data sets. So choosing an open access license, helping them to choose a good repository. By doing that, you do involve them, but you take the last step, the last burden away from them, which I think is a good solution for now.
Yeah, and I must say it's a common theme that I hear every time I talk to institutions like yours. Common theme being we try to make it as easy and as light on the researchers as possible, because we want to lower the barrier for them to make sure that they actually, well, they focus on doing research, but they also focus on best practices like data sharing and also having a complete overview in the CRIS system about the data being shared in the institution. Thank you. Perhaps let's move on to the next question. I'd like to discuss with you about the why. Why is it so important for your institutions to have an overview of the research data produced by your researchers? Can you share your experience, your thoughts? Perhaps Hester, would you like to start now?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it's important for researchers themselves because they depend on it partially to, how do you say it? Their funder requires them to show that they have made their data available through the FAIR principles. So it's important for the researchers, first of all. Dutch institutions are also visited by quality check committees once every 6 years or so, and we have seen that adding data sets as another product to our CRIS really pleases them. So in terms of institutional evaluations, it's important as well. And I think finally, it's good to track research data because it makes it easier to look back and to trace developments in terms of amount of production, research areas, which teams have been active throughout certain years, etc. So,
thank you. Wiebe, anything you want to add?
Not really, no. I fully agree on Hester's words.
Yeah. Bill, your experience from Manchester?
Yes, I mean, I think Hester's obviously covered lots of the kind of the why from the perspective of us too. We do this because in some case, in many instances we have a requirement to from the funder. We're also, when you talk about the assessment side of things, we're also, we can't prepare quite yet because we don't know when it will happen or in what context, but the UK has the Research Excellence Framework, the REF assessments, which take place on every few years, and every indication is that there will be a greater expectation for research data to be shared openly, and to be and for the quality of that data to be better in the next REF if that takes place. So I think we wanted to, what we want to do is to have a good footing to be able to do that. We would rather be making preparations for those kind of assessments now than to have to respond to it in a kind of a more reactive way in several years. I think alongside all of this, I would have thought it would be a common theme for colleagues, on the call today in every institution. We want to also think about how open research and open science can be pushed forwards, and that means that what we're trying to do, and I think I alluded to it a little bit with the open research tracker work we're doing at Manchester, is that we want to be able to think about kind of first-class research outputs at every stage of the life cycle. So whether that is software, whether that is data, whether that's the publication at the end, the more we understand about where this is happening and how and from whom, the better we can report on that as libraries, and the more information we can give to researchers. And I think there's another thing it leads into, which is that increasingly we're looking at obviously how reward and career progression takes place for academics, and there's been a long era where that is based on certain things, and I think we want to move towards open science and open research being more of a factor for that. So again, we have to be able to show that this exists and how it's happening to support that. So I think those are the main things that we're thinking about from the Manchester perspective, certainly.
Thank you. And there is one thing you mentioned that really resonated with me, and that's made me think about a comment I heard from a peer of yours in another Dutch institution, not Groningen, another Dutch institution. The administrator, I was asking the same question, trying to understand why it was relevant for that institution. And the lady told me, well, because we believe in open science, and open data is a big pillar in open science. And that's why also we make an effort to publish our data, to make our data visible in our portal, because what's the point of doing open science and open data if we don't show that we're involved and if we don't make an active effort to support it? And I thought it was a really insightful thing to say, and it really stuck with me. All right. Alexander reminded me that we actually had 50 minutes for this webinar. I thought we were going through the end of the hour. I thought this was a great discussion, but we have to close it here. So Wiebe, Hester, Bill, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your experience, and all the audience today. Thank you so much for joining. We hope we shared some valid and insightful content with you. Let us know, what you think, and if we can do better next time. Alexander will share a survey after this. So thank you and have a great rest of the day. Bye.